Council, the Department for Business, they're all funding research through funding grants. Then you have the European Commission has a funding project where universities and researchers can apply for grants. On a charity side, you have the Wellcome Trust, which is a very big research funder. You have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example. So there's quite a few very big research funders in the UK that have been investing heavily in R&D at universities. So I took this graph is actually from a paper that was published in the New England Journal a couple of years ago. It's about the role of public sector research in the discovery of drugs and vaccines. Universities are public sector research institutions. There's a few that are not universities, but majority universities fall under that. And what is quite interesting about this study is if you look into, so the big number here, the 21.1%, is for new molecular entities, so new drugs that have been put on the market. And if they receive priority review, that means most often that they have a very much an added benefit, so they're blockbuster drugs. And what this paper found is that universities and public sector research institutions have been at the forefront of really delivering high impact medications and drugs, whereas you can see a lot of the other drugs don't necessarily are as blockbuster as the ones that the public sector research institutions have been putting out. And quite interesting is also that, so this really just looked into drugs that have been developed at universities, but there's been quite a few papers recently coming out as well looking into public funding, which this paper hasn't looked into, that a lot of government support has gone into the research, a lot of the medicines that we're seeing today that have a high impact. So this would lead us to our first workshop part. So let's see, how many people are we? We're currently, I think, about 8 participants. Let me just go back. And what I wanted to do is to form groups of, maybe we can do 2 people, if that's all right with you, and then join a breakout room and prepare a 30-second pitch to the Dean of your medical faculty, and briefly describe the access to medicines problem that you've been hearing a lot about this weekend. So it doesn't have to be the topics that I've just briefly talked about in the slides in the past minutes, but also other things you've been hearing and learning about this weekend. And then explain to your dean why your university should care about access to medicines. Like, why is this important that universities, you know, should think about their role in this. So let me just see if I can make breakout rooms. And let's see, time-wise, I think let's meet back about at 11:30, if that's okay with you. So we have about 5 minutes to prepare a 30-second pitch, and then maybe we can hear 2 or 3 of them, and then continue with the presentation.
Are you able to see the breakout one at the bottom? Oh yeah, I see.
Yes, I'm making them. I don't know, there are less people now, I think. Is that true?
So Jake, so if we move Tabby to the room where Jake is, so that they can then.
Yes.
Okay, I'll do that to room 3.
You do that, okay. Perfect.
There we go. That should work.
Okay, so they can prepare.
And yeah, sorry about the lateness and the number estimation.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Now, I was thinking also to make it in a way that if we're less people, like this would still work quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good for the flexibility.
How many people attended the conference this weekend? Like,
so yesterday in the morning, I think the plenary got 70, okay. And then the workshop, so I had about 12 in the morning session. I think the other one had maybe 20, and then I had 10 in the next one. I'm not sure how much the other one had. So this morning's plenary, I'm not 100% sure the numbers on that.
Yeah, you usually see a dropout rate over time, especially when it's
Yeah,
online, because people just sort of
and
turn
on a
off at
Sunday
some
as
point.
well. Yeah, fair. And also what some presenters do is you can pop into breakout rooms just to see how things are going. So
So just quickly, how do I do that? I just click on a room? Or okay,
yeah, so I think, yeah, exactly. And you can just
okay,
pop in and out.
I'll just do
And I'll
that.
stay here just in case anyone gets bounced back
Okay,
or
sounds
anything.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Should I start now?
Yep, just go ahead. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so 1 in 6 people worldwide suffer from a neglected tropical disease. But last year, out of all the 1,500 new drugs that were developed, only 21 of them were developed for the treatment of tropical disease. And to use the example of in the early 2000s at Yale, the students actually lobbied the university to lower the price of the HIV medication. I think it was something like $12,000 a year, and it went down to $350 a year. And I think now it's $150 a year, it was about a 20-fold reduction. And I think that shows that even at a university level, if we do something just at a very local level, it can actually have quite a large impact worldwide. So we can use what happened at Yale to, for example, if we go back to the tropical diseases, to lobby and campaign for more focus on neglected tropical diseases, for example.
Oh, great.
That was our pitch.
No, that was great. Well done. Second group, I think, is in, let me see, Andrea and KCL. Can you tell me your name? I forgot to ask. Oh, sorry, I think
it's Aisha.
Aisha, okay.
Sorry, it's our like generic account that we're using for this, Aisha.
Okay, who of you two wants to pitch?
I can pitch, yeah.
Okay, Aisha, go ahead.
Amazing. So hello, I'll start off with a statistic. In high income countries, 25% of the population have been recently vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. When you compare to lower and lower middle income countries such as Thailand and South Africa, less than 1% of their population have been vaccinated. Another interesting point, people in the UK pay twice for any medication. You as universities can dictate or can decide how your research and how your products are being used, licensed, patented, before you sell it off, before you get involved with a big manufacturing company. So you can decide how often we pay when you really think about it. So it's really important to remember the amount of power you have at a university, to think about the way that you can engage yourself with manufacturing companies, and think about the way that you license your products to ensure that we can have a very global and very affordable access to medicines.
Great, thank you very much. Well done. Let's go further then. So you've just brought it up already briefly. So I wanted to talk a bit about universities, what they do when they do research and something comes out of it. So when we talk about health innovation, and what universities do is, I don't know if you've ever heard of patenting. So a patent is a form of intellectual property, which the university, if they think it is something that is of value, they decide to apply for. And a patent protects an invention for a certain period of time. And usually that's about 20 years in the EU. And what a patent means, it prevents any third party in a country where the patent was granted of making, using, selling, or importing the technology. So if you own the patent, you're the only one who's allowed to use that innovation, unless you allow somebody else to, you know, do research with it or to produce it, to sell it. And so what do universities do when they have such a patent? Because obviously universities do a lot of research, but are not very good in, you know, doing clinical trials and then bringing it to the market. So that's something they leave to pharmaceutical companies, to the private sector in most cases. And the process when, you know, university research is being transferred to the private sector, we call technology transfer. And that is basically the process by which the rights to use and commercialize knowledge originating from the research is transferred from the original owner, which is the university, to another entity or entities. And how do universities do that? So they have something they call technology transfer offices, TTOs, who manage this knowledge transfer. So they're the ones who decide when to apply for a patent. They're the ones looking for potential interested parties. So for example, companies who would then want to have a license to the technology. And how does this technology transfer work? So there's different ways of doing technology transfer. One of the most commonly applied ones is licensing. I think you've briefly mentioned it as well with the HIV and Bristol Myers Squibb, where Yale University gave a license to Bristol Myers Squibb back in the early 2000s. And what you can see, there's basically two ways of doing it. There's an exclusive license and a non-exclusive license. And an exclusive license means, so you as a university, you have an innovation, you apply for a patent that has been granted, and then you give an exclusive license to one company, one other entity, which could be Bristol Myers Squibb, it could be AstraZeneca, it could be a smaller company. And they are then the only ones who own and can do something with that innovation. So they're the ones who can produce it, can do further research with it. There is some exceptions at times that universities can still do research with it that they put in those clauses. But basically, so the company is the only one who can manufacture and sell it. And what you can see is this leads to a monopoly. And if you only have one seller, they can set the price. And this is what we've been seeing, for example, with Sofosbuvir and Gilead, being able to charge about £50,000 for medication, just because they were the only ones on the market, there was no competition. And then there is non-exclusive licenses, which means if you, as a university, invent something, you apply for a patent, but then you decide instead of giving this innovation to just one company, you give it to multiple companies to manufacture and sell it. For example, you give it to a company in India, you give it to a company in Europe or two companies in Europe. And then you get competition on the market. And what we've seen in the past is if you have generic production, which means there's more producers who produce the drug, the prices usually decrease and more people have access in the end. And then there's another way that universities transfer their innovations, and they call it spin-offs or spin-outs. And what does that mean? So basically, a spin-off company is an entity or company that is set up by the university or one of its researchers. So a researcher who's developed an innovation then decides, well, I'm going to set up my own company to further develop that research, which can be a drug, a vaccine, a diagnostic tool. So there's different ways this can be done. And quite often universities help the researchers set this up. They look for funding, so there's going to be investors coming in. In most cases, the university then gives a license to the spin-off company. There's also other ways they're doing it, but these are the most common ways. And then the spin-off company gets investment and further develops the research that they've started at a university. And I wanted to have a look at, tech transfer sounds very, very technical. So have a bit of a look at tech transfer during the COVID-19 pandemic, because you've probably heard and seen a lot about the COVID-19 vaccines. And it's very interesting how the tech transfer behind influenced the pricing and access to the vaccines that are on the market today. So this is just a bit of background looking into the funding aspect that was brought up before as well. So this is for the 3 vaccines that received market approval in the UK. So we have the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, and the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. These are all just funding that was during the pandemic. So post January 2020, funding coming in from government and charity organizations, basically giving the last push to get the vaccines ready for the market. And you can see these are very big amounts. We're talking about 500,000 to 1.7 billion of public funding that went into the research here. And I found this graph quite interesting. So this is a graph about the 3 vaccines that I just brought up. And as you can see, the prices that are charged are quite different. So the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is by far the cheapest, costing about £3 per dose. The Moderna is very expensive at about £25, and the Pfizer BioNTech costs about £15. If you look into the storage, we sort of know that the Oxford AstraZeneca is easier to distribute because it doesn't require the same cold chain mechanisms as the Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. There's obviously issues now with regulators restricting access, but for the discussion on technology transfer, I don't want to go into that too much in detail. I primarily want to focus on the pricing side and look into why is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine actually so much cheaper. And so looking really into the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as an example, I don't know if you've read the headline saying, for example, I think this was in The Guardian, that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was to be sold to developing countries at cost price, that AstraZeneca has pledged not to make any profit from the vaccines. There were a lot of statements out in the media over the past year. And from what we can see is that the Oxford vaccine is the cheapest one currently on the market, or one of the cheapest ones. And the question is, why is that? Because if you look at the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, they are both also coming from university research. About a decade ago, they were both spin-out companies at the time that then went into further development and now launched the vaccine. But why are they so much more expensive than the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine? And what we could see is that Oxford University put out a statement last year saying that any innovation that's related to COVID-19 should have certain conditions attached when they're licensing it to a third party or a pharmaceutical company. And what they did is they included pricing conditions in their license, which meant basically that AstraZeneca is supposed to sell the vaccine at cost with a small margin of profit, which is about 20% from my understanding, what the media has been reporting. So Oxford University developed the vaccine and then put a condition on it saying, well, it should be available to the global population at an affordable price. And then there's another example that hasn't received much media attention yet because it is a vaccine still under development that's undergoing clinical trials. And the interesting part about it is, so it's being developed at Imperial College London, and they chose to go a different way. So what Imperial College did is they actually set up a spin-out company like happened with, for example, what now is the Moderna vaccine and the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. But instead of making it a for-profit company, they decided to make it a social enterprise. And a social enterprise basically means that it is not supposed to make profit, but just make enough revenue to sustain itself. So the way this company is set up means that pricing decisions will basically mean that it just needs to sustain the spin-out company, but then the prices should be set in a way that there is global access, especially for developing countries. And I wanted to quickly talk about it, but I don't know how much you've heard about this over the weekend already. So solutions that have been proposed about access to vaccines. So the graph on the right, as you can see, is that the number of doses that are available, very few have been going to low-income countries, and high-income countries mainly have bought up most of the vaccine doses available on the market. And one solution that has been proposed to increase access globally is COVAX. And that's basically a global initiative to pool the procurement, so the buying of the COVID-19 vaccines. And it's been led by UN organizations, Gavi, CEPI, and has been funded by donors and primarily by high-income countries. And the idea is that 92 low and middle-income countries are eligible to receive COVID-19 vaccines with the aim to vaccinate about 20% of their populations. But as you can see, COVAX has barely bought about 1 billion doses so far that go to all of these countries that are part of it. So it's a very low number that goes to these countries, and most doses have been bought up by high-income countries. So the question is, how much of a solution is it if it faces purchasing competition on the market? So there is other solutions that have been proposed. For example, the CTAP, the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, which was launched by the WHO. And the idea behind this, what I've just talked about with the licensing, is basically that it's an international voluntary license pool where the owners of the intellectual property, so in this case, for example, AstraZeneca now is the owner of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, BioNTech Pfizer, so Pfizer is the owner of the BioNTech vaccine, that the idea is that they share their patent and the know-how to produce the vaccine, and also the data for the clinical trials that went into getting market approval with this licensing pool, with the aim to facilitate generic production. So there is manufacturing capacity in other countries, but they're not allowed to produce the vaccine because there is patent protection in those countries that has been filed by universities or by the owners of the IP, the pharmaceutical companies. And the idea of CTAP is not an entirely new idea. So it builds on the Medicines Patent Pool initiative, which was set up quite a few years ago with the aim to facilitate generic production of, in the beginning, HIV medication, which also expanded to tuberculosis drugs and other drugs for populations in low middle income countries. But obviously it raises the question of, is it sustainable to have patent protection and very much restrict the capacity to produce to very few manufacturers if we have such a global pandemic that would require a global effort to have vaccines reaching populations everywhere in the world? And this leads me to the pitching workshop part 2. So what we could do is we go back into the same groups we've done before and pitch again to the Dean of your medical faculty. And this time I want to focus on describing the access issue to COVID-19 vaccines, or also other drugs like remdesivir, if you want to focus on that, during the COVID pandemic. And then think about what can your university do to ensure access. Are there any specific things they can change in their behavior or can think about, should discuss to play a role in ensuring access? And then why should your university care about access? Or why is it actually important that we care? And there's this nice golden circle, which basically is the same 3 things. So what is the question? So every organization knows what they do. So these are products they sell or services they do. So what does university do? While they do research, they do very important early on research. Oxford, for example, did really the entire research cycle for the vaccine, which now led to the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. How do they do it? Well, you can think about how they transfer it to the private sector, and why is it important how these things are done. So I want you guys to think about this, and let's maybe come back in about 10 minutes and have another round of pitching to have a think about these topics. Let me just see if I can make breakout rooms again. Open all rooms. Okay. So I think you guys can go back to your breakout rooms.
Nice.
Okay, I think this works.
Yeah, no, it's working, and they're in the right one.
Perfect. Yeah, I think they're all quite motivated, so this is good.
Yeah. Good. I'm learning a lot, by the way. I didn't know a lot about any of this.
That's good. Yeah, I was like totally not sure how much people know, so it's kind of hard because they've already done this like for a day, like yesterday, and had a plenary, but still like there's probably quite differences in understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. I think this provides like a really good bigger picture, because I think sometimes it's like too niche and then you don't see the bigger picture, but this is really like, I'm like, oh, that's how it's laid out.
Yeah, because I was first like, should I talk about technology transfer only and like ETAF and stuff, but it's so specific that if you don't know all the background stuff, you kind of get lost in the details. So I think
no, exactly, yeah.
This is more useful than probably. All right, I'm gonna have a look into the breakout rooms.
Sounds good.
And you know, have a pitch to convince your dean of the medical faculty about the importance of access to COVID-19 vaccines.
Yes, so Lancaster University is developing basically like a nasal spray version for a COVID vaccine, similar to the flu, like the nasal spray flu vaccine that's given to children. And basically, so I'd like to urge kind of, so COVAX has only managed to kind of build up around 1 billion doses of the vaccine. So obviously isn't, and which considering how many people there are across the world, let alone like low development countries, isn't going to manage to go that far. So the idea of patent sharing and kind of spreading the knowledge of how to develop the vaccines would probably go a lot further in terms of sharing it. So I would kind of like to urge the dean of the university to at least consider that as an idea with this new development of this vaccine.
Great. And Andrea, Aisha, who of you wants to go and pitch?
I'm very open. Andrew, do you have a preference? Yeah, all right, okie dokie. So we'll be focusing more on your role as a university dean, so of a medical school, so medical faculty. And sort of when we think about the true purpose, or one of the main purposes of a university is to teach the future, is to empower future students to become change makers of the world. So it is sort of your university duty to make sure that we are promoting moral and ethical values. Another aspect is focusing specifically on medical students. We all want to, as medical students, want to help people. We want to make sure we do make change. And through this sort of policy change, when focusing on COVID, we can ensure that thousands, millions across the world can have access to these medications. So we're not just triggering sort of one person, making sure one person gets the vaccine. There is a larger effect. Focusing on King's in particular, it'd be fantastic for King's to get a big shout out as one of the leading universities to make that change. And you are really important. And once you start, other universities will follow in changing the way that we license, change the way that we talk about our research. And we really don't want to fall into that trap, that really, really scary number of $9 trillion floating above our head of how much it's going to cost us if we don't approach and justify and quickly rectify this COVID pandemic using the current vaccines. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well done, everyone. Really great pitches, and I think it's a very important discussion to have, and it's obviously very challenging talking to universities about this. But what we've been seeing, and that's quite promising, is that there's more interest and understanding from universities over the past year or two about these issues, and also students caring more, and just having more discussions about it, I think is already making quite a change. And it's a long way to go to really change universities' practices. But it is something that is possible, and that we've been seeing more and more interest, but also changes happening. So I just quickly wanted to go into, am I still sharing my screen, or is that, no, I think I'm not. Let me just quickly go back. Okay, so the last bit I just wanted to talk about is, so as UAEM, the organization that I'm involved with, we've had a lot of thinking about, also before the pandemic already, how we can do technology transfer more equitably, thinking about access, thinking about, how drugs can become affordable or stay affordable for populations that need it most. And what we came up with as a solution, basically as a proposal, is the Equitable Technology Access Framework, or short ETAF. And it's sort of a policy guidance framework that aims to help universities writing their own access policies. And it focuses on the public benefits arising from public investment and research, with the aim to have drugs available, accessible, and affordable, so that the end product of the research, when it reaches the market, actually also benefits the populations, rather than just being very expensive and only available for a few people. And like the general goals of ETAF is really to improve global equitable access, what we've been talking about a lot with the COVID vaccines now, but then also to promote further development of health technologies, which can be drugs, vaccines, diagnostics, because that's quite often the big challenge, is if you put conditions on transferring. A lot of universities say, well, that is very nice, but no company will ever be interested in then actually getting a license if we put conditions on it and further develop it, because the profit perspective might be less lucrative for them. And then the third goal of ETAF is really to improve transparency of the way we're conducting technology transfer. So for example, the license between Oxford University and AstraZeneca is confidential, like most licenses or technology transfer agreements. And as a public, you can't access them. There is no way to request it from a university, because it's considered confidential information for economic or business purposes. So generally, it's very difficult to hold your institutions accountable, because they do not have to share how they're conducting this sort of commercialization process of public research and innovation. So this is basically what we came with. And there's a lot of ways that we suggest how universities can do this better. And if you're interested in working on this, I just put it on the next slide. UAEM UK has a Facebook website, and we also have an Instagram channel where we're posting regularly updates. And we're basically running campaigns at UK universities at the moment. We recently, it's quite a big success, got the University of Edinburgh to update its access to medicines policy, and it is founded on the principles of ETAF, and a lot of the sort of conditions or principles that we think are important to conduct research and technology transfer more equitably. So that's been quite a milestone, and there's a lot more happening, talking to a lot of universities. So if you're interested and want to get involved, have a chat with university as well, reach out to us, and we can see what we can do, and just start campaigning at your local university and try to also convince them to implement more progressive policies. So thank you guys so much for joining this workshop. It was really great having so many great discussion and pitches, and hearing how you all want to contribute to sort of making university research better for everyone and more fair and equitable. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I think there was one question that was in the breakout room that we just wanted to push to the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question in a sense that we've kind of over the conference has been, different speakers have kind of answered, but I just thought I'd ask you if you could kind of succinctly, I guess, answer it. But so whenever I've had a conversation, for example, with my parents about access to medicine and patents specifically, obviously it isn't the only barrier, but they always say, surely if you remove kind of the patent, or you remove the ability to have some kind of monopoly, then the incentive to innovate will kind of disappear. And my mum would say something like, well, they spent all this money, although we don't really know how much they've spent, but theoretically they've spent all this money on research and development, and then suddenly all the generic manufacturers can produce the same drug. She said it seems unfair.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how you would respond to that.
Yeah, I think this is sort of the challenging bit, is finding the middle ground between not removing all the incentives for research, which obviously are patents, because they give you a monopoly, so you're the only one who can manufacture and sell it, and you can set the price. But then also account for the public research that is taking place and the public funding that goes into research. And so my personal opinion is that you can, to some extent, sort of attach conditions to public funding, for example, or conduct technology transfer in a more fair way. But obviously, you always have to work with the private sector. Like, we haven't seen public research making it to the market just by universities, developing it entirely, doing the clinical trials, doing the market approvals. That's not really happened. So there is a need for collaboration. I think just a really important thing is, how do we collaborate, and how can we make this more fair and equitable, that the end product is affordable and accessible to everyone? And if it is through monopolies, well, if we have to stick with them, okay, then we need to find ways that the company can still make the profits it needs to sustain itself, but maybe not the excessive profits that, for example, Gilead has been making. I think Pfizer now with the vaccine is making about 5 billion in profits. So the question is this still fair if the entire research has been funded, or a large part of the research has been funded by the public? And we know that a lot of the risk taking early on comes from the public side, because as you've been seeing also, that pharmaceutical companies are investing less and less in research. So it is really trying to find the middle ground. And I think that is the big challenge, because we need to work with the pharma industry and the private sector, and just saying they're the bad people is not going to lead anywhere. So it is really about trying to find a way, like Oxford University has done with AstraZeneca, where AstraZeneca has agreed to certain conditions on the vaccine, which was quite a novel way of doing things. And we haven't really seen that before, but it shows that it's possible. And I think learning from these examples and trying to implement them more widely would be a way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Do you guys have any more questions?
Sabrina, I'm kind of curious about sort of your experience when sort of organising ETAF, and how that came about for yourself. Yeah,
so it's been actually quite a long process. I started working on this, I think about 4 years ago. And it basically started, so before we were just advocating for social responsible licensing, which was the previous campaign of UAEM, and very much focusing on licenses, and low-income countries, developing countries should have access, and the non-exclusivity part there in the generic production. But there was a lot of criticism from universities and technology transfer offices saying this doesn't go far enough, because it doesn't entirely cover and understand the way technology transfer is taking place. So by just advocating for, well, you should just hand out non-exclusive licenses or not patent at all, it's not gonna change the system, because it's not really feasible for a lot of research and innovation that's happening. So ETAF kind of came along that line of just talking a lot to TTOs, talking to government bodies, trying to understand also their sort of thinking, and where they say, well, we need to improve this, or we need to make changes, but we can't entirely think about how to do it. And this is sort of where we try to think about certain ways, lots of reading, lots of research. So yeah, this is kind of how it came along, I would say. And then just pitching ideas to government institutions and universities and getting feedback, lots of criticism over the years, still lots of criticism, but as you can see, there is more uptake and interest now. So I think we've done something right. And ETAF is a sort of a framework that is there to grow and learn from. So the idea is that it develops over time as well as universities change and develop further, as technology transfer changes, there's new ways of doing it and coming in, things that are being tried out, like we've seen with Oxford and Imperial. So I think these are just ways that we need to incorporate more and then see how we can learn from them as well.
Thank you. I do actually have a follow-up, so I can...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you have any sort of advice for, I know some of us here are at different universities, so I'm at King's, I think we said we've got a couple more here. It would be great to know if you have any advice for us on how to sort of encourage universities to take up ETAF or to begin that conversation.
Yeah, so what we do quite often is so just have a chat with people. So for example, if like you guys know a lot about the topic already, like you've attended workshops on it, just have a meeting with your technology transfer office, for example, ask them lots of questions, try to understand how your university works, what incentivizes them. Is it the more obligation to society? Is it making as much profit as possible? Do they understand the role that they're having in the research and development environment? Because there's obviously, every university is quite different, and the extent of understanding the impact they could potentially have also varies quite significantly. And I would say that then impacts also the way you conduct your campaign and advocacy efforts. So that would be a first step. And then just really think about how you could angle it. Like, I think, Jake, the idea you were like mentioning with the COVID vaccine nasal spray is a really good way in. Just saying, well, we've seen you doing this research and we think it's very important, and we want to talk about how you could, you know, bring it to the market in a way that it actually reaches people. So there is ways in. If you talk to people and do your research, you usually find really good examples, which make it a bit more applicable and understandable for people, because it is a very technical topic in the end.
Thank you so much, Sabrina.
All right, are there any more questions left? Then I think I can give it back to the organizer, because I assume it's lunch break time, from my understanding.
Yeah, so it's lunch break now, and then the other plenaries or workshops will start at 1:15. So if you're joining Donna and Rachel's artistic campaigning, it's the same link that we're using here. And then there's another workshop running concurrently. So yeah, thank you for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Well done, Sabrina. Thank you, Kat. Enjoy your lunch too, Sabrina. Thank you for joining us as well for the conference. I'm going to quickly bounce. I can see people joining in this other room. Thank you so much.
I think you're all gonna head off, and
Yeah, of course.
thank you for organizing, and it was really cool to have everyone there on the workshop.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye.
much, Sabrina. Thank you, Kat. Bye.